Hi guys, Victoria Bardovic here, and this is episode 5 of the Evolutionary Edge of Eros podcast, where we explore the microcosm of the evolutionary edge of the Eros, whatever's happening inside and your personal journey of Eros as a spiritual path. And we also explore the macro level, which is leadership and what is happening in the sacred sexuality space and what's possible for the next evolution of leaders. I've brought on my husband today, Miroslav Bardovic, and
Miroslav.
he is going to be sharing with us a little bit about our project, the Fuck Up Nights in the Gold Coast, and our experience of what happens when people share stories from a certain place inside, and what we've been feeling as the next evolution for influencers and ourselves included. So maybe you share with them a little bit about what you do and then about our project.
So primarily what I do is I teach people speaking, and it's a very embodied, authentic based approach to speaking as opposed to showing up and doing the dance of what it's supposed to look like. And alongside that is a lot of teaching people how to tell their stories as well.
Yeah. And about a year ago, I came to you and was like, we should do this Fuck Up Nights because it's going to be really good therapy. Do you want to share with them a little bit about Fuck Up Nights?
Yeah, I mean, Fuck Up Nights is basically entrepreneurs sharing their stories of failure and fuck up inside business. It's been amazing since we started running it. I think on average we get somewhere between like 70 to 100 people. Someone recently coined it as the entrepreneurial event to be a part of on the Gold Coast. We run it monthly. And I think because the speakers are being authentic and opening up often stories they've never shared before, it just creates an environment where it's just like an effortless sense of connection. It's like, oh, we're just being real with each other.
Yeah.
Anything you want to add?
Yeah, I mean, I think what I want to explore today is some of the challenges we've been having with Fuck Up Nights.
Yeah, let's do that.
And a lot of that is around the speakers themselves, you know, like maybe you can share the brief that we give people and what comes through.
Yeah, so we found what works really well is like the most loved speakers, what they've done really well is the story is raw, authentic and vulnerable. There's some kind of stake at hand, like whether it's money or emotion or, you know, there's a sense of bigness around what's happening. It's not like, oh, I tried my first sale and it went wrong. And
it's more like I lost $2 million and this was why it was fucked.
Yeah, or I had to fire a bunch of people, or I had to explain to the team why this project went wrong. There's a sense of like, okay, we can feel the bigness of what this was for the person. But then inside of that, there's a lot of different ways you can communicate the same thing. And we found that the most loved speakers are the ones that don't go into teaching and don't go into facilitating. And it's like, that's almost a safe space for speakers to go into and what they usually do. And it's a lot harder just to stay with their story. And also like not trying to explain the story to people or
frame it for them.
Yeah, frame it too much for them. It's like just giving people the story is the real value.
Yeah, and like just to give you a little bit of insight what that looks like, and it's super painful for us when we share with people like this is what you need to do, and then we get such an experience of like the same stuff that people are taught in the speaking space, which is also what I wanted to bring you on for, because what other
I don't actually know what I'm in here for, by the way.
What other public speaking teachers are teaching is how to share your rags to riches story. And there's this like template that's inside of the leadership space, which is like, so what we're getting, instead of people coming on and saying, so this is how I fucked up, this is what I learned and what I got for myself, in the same way as you would at like a dinner party or something, we're getting people that come on and say, here's how I fucked up, here's the lessons that you need to get so that you can do better in your life. And it's like, there's still this vibration of like motivational speaking.
And every time someone does this, I'll have participants and attendees coming up to me going, this is boring. It's like they don't want that shit. They can get it 3 times a week at any single event they go to, which I think is really the magic of Fuck Up Nights.
Exactly. And then we started talking about like, what is this next evolution? Because nobody wants to hear a motivational speech anymore. Like we have been Tony Robbins, you know, up to our eyeballs now, you know, like we all get that framework. But I feel like the next evolution of influencers and, you know, leaders is going to have to bring something else, because yes, you are an authority in whatever your space is, and yes, you've got a niche and that is important, but what is possible when we share stories from a place of this is what happened, here's what happened for me inside of that experience.
Yeah, here's what I learned, as opposed to this has happened, this is what you should learn. It's like hold it. Yeah, hold
the frame of that, because then people can come back and receive gold from that story over and over again. Another thing that I really dislike inside of when people share their stories is when they get up and say, here's my core wound. and then they start to share the story of what their core wound has created for them in their life. It's like, well, I don't even get to have an experience as the audience member to draw my own conclusions on what that was for you and how that impacts my life. And so because I've already been told this is what it is for you.
Yeah, and this is like, there's a few levels of wrong or not wrong, just ineffective storytelling here. Like the last thing you want to do in storytelling is give away the tension before you've given away the story. It would be the equivalent of giving the punchline before you tell the joke. And when you say, this is my core wound, it's kind of like, okay, well, the tension's out of the bag now.
Yeah. And we were talking a little bit about what happened.
I just want to add, and then it also becomes very impersonal. The story becomes about you and your trauma, as opposed to the journey of business and the mistake you've made inside the business.
And I don't know if it's actually vulnerable if you share up front what is the vulnerability. Here's the vulnerability, and now I'll tell you about it. It's like, that's losing the edge of, okay, I'm going to tell you something, and this is edgy information, and then you're in the vulnerability of it.
What were you going to say though, just before this?
I just want to share about how when you know, like those Hindu myths that we were talking about, like when you share like a myth or a story that can have multiple meanings, and you let people draw their own meaning from it, it's like every single person in the room can get something. Because one of the things that I get uncomfortable with when people come and share in the other way is like, oh my God, there's so many people in the room that I know that are incredible at business and have made so much more money than this person, or, you know, have done so much more in business, and they're always just like, no, I'm gonna go home, you know. Versus if someone came out and said like, here's what happened to me, here's my experience, and that person, if they are like super, you know, experienced in business, or they're just on their day one of business, all of those people in between are all going to receive something, because, and they could hear that story over and over again and receive something completely different at different stages of their experience of business. And actually that's what I want from the sexuality space as well, and also what I want for myself, because, you know, when I created the New Paradigm Intimacy, I wanted to create a space where people could have their own sexual awakening and make their own meaning of leadership, and then go out into the world and bring that. And what I had people wanting is, Vic, can you tell us what exactly what this needs to look like, exactly how this needs to be delivered? And what that creates is like something that is finite, something that is going to have to be, how to describe this? It's like, it has a timeline of when that's going to be useful for. And for me, the biggest thing that I see in sexuality, and for me the whole purpose of this podcast, is that Eros and sexuality is ever evolving. And so anytime we try to tell people, this is how you do this is how you have this polarity, it's like we're missing out on the complete unknown of where Eros wants to take us. So I've kind of taken this into a bit of a tangent here.
Yeah, you've lost me a bit.
But I want to bring it back. But to bring it all the way back, it's like, I guess the question that I'm asking myself is like, how do we as leaders, and for myself, if I was to come out and bring something that people can learn from around sexuality or around Eros, how can I invite them into that culture of being with what is present, what is alive, being with what is actually in the unknown? And my deepest belief is that happens through storytelling.
Yeah.
Did I pull it back?
Yeah, I feel that's a pretty good pullback. I think it's like we have to trust in the power of the story. And I also think it's a lot more vulnerable to tell the story than to go into a teaching about the thing you learned because of the story. That's like so far removed from what's actually happening. And I also do feel a sense of compassion. Like a lot of the time, the speakers that we've seen that can't do that is generally a sense, it'll be a few things. I think the biggest one is fear. Like you have to be willing with braving your soul. And I think the speakers that have done this well are typically the ones with the most experience. And they don't come on stage being like, check me out, I'm the speaker. It's like they are absolutely okay humbling themselves on the stage in front of everyone and letting everyone else into that because they don't have anything to prove. And I feel the reason people kind of contract and share the takeaways and make it third person as well, I could speak a bit about this later, is because it's like scary and it's afraid, and there is still this sense of needing to, even if it's unconscious, needing to keep an image of the audience. And also for me, so many times I'm like, God, I just want to hold your hand and invite you into what's possible if you just let go. You have words?
No, that's it. Like I feel like that I feel there's a timeline for people that want to share a story and give people the lessons. And I've also
there's a space for it.
There is a space for it, but I think it's also like, what I'm questioning is, does all leadership needs to be this way that I'm desiring? And is that the next frontier? Or is it just like stages of the evolutionary growth of where you're at on your journey? Because a lot of people that come and share these stories from and motivate the audience and stuff. Like a lot of people love that as well.
Yeah, but I also feel it's like, it's usually the pattern we found, if someone is in fuck up nights for the first time, they will love it. Even if we have the three most average speakers we've ever had, the reviews from the people who are there for the first time are like, oh my God, this is amazing. And it is, because there's no event like it out there. But the seasoned people that have been, you know, a dozen times or half a dozen times, and they've seen the range of stories, like they develop this sense of like, oh wow, this speaker's really bringing everything. And they're also the ones that are like, you know, that this, you know, it's not really touching what this event is about. It's kind of like they're trying to do something.
Yeah, no, there is truth in that. But then that's what I'm trying to gauge. Is it like, if you've never been to a conference before, you've never heard people speak before, that everything's amazing and it's great to be motivated from when you've never been motivated before. But when you've seen every Tony Robbins and every other person that's like that person, I think there has to be something else. And that is what I feel like both of us are interested in, as far as like this cultural piece goes, of leadership, influences, all of it. Because I mean, the reason why a lot of people are like this is because this is how we're taught to speak on Instagram as well. Have your niche and then tell people about what it is and how it is. And the universal laws according to Victoria is this, you know, it's like great, but there's more to life than that. And I'm not interested in impacting or sharing with leaders or teaching like future leaders how to live inside of that paradigm. What would interest me, because I guess this is what I'm sitting on the edge of with Sex Lab and some of the other things I've explored in this podcast, is if we're going to teach people something, we really want to teach them how to be authentic, how to be vulnerable, because leadership is not a formula. And anytime we give somebody a formula, we're really just like robbing them of their true leadership. Yeah. And that there's no right or wrong inside of this, but there is something that is, what I'm curious of is, what is the cultural collective seeking? And I think you have a lot of opinions on that when it comes to storytelling.
Say that again. Cultural.
Like the collective, what culture are they seeking?
In terms of
storytelling.
Which collective? Inside fuck up nights, or just
inside
generally?
of like beyond, like just actually human beings as in the world, you know? Because I think that I could be wrong, but I sense that a lot of people are tired of the way that the influencer culture is happening online right now. And I feel like there's a new wave of people coming through online, and like the algorithm generally is going to get tired like of that. Like that's how the algorithm works, right? And so there is this evolutionary edge that I'm always curious of, like, what is that? And as a public speaking teacher, when you're teaching and helping people become leaders,
okay, I see where you're going.
How would you share that?
One of my previous students was currently at an event where a lot, I don't know, maybe something like 100 speakers told their story. And she goes to me afterwards, she's like, Miroslav, I got exhausting. I got bored of hearing people's stories. And I've also found, like, in different spaces, and I've spoken to other speakers about this, it's like the way a speaker tells their story, you can tell who they studied from, because they're using a template and a map. And it's kind of like there's no, it's like there is always a degree of emotionality in a story, but you can feel that it's coming out of a can. It's like it's pre-framed and they're reading the story out of their head or the template or whatever. And it's like, it's the opposite of being real and raw and vulnerable. It's like being scripted and mechanical and saying the right things. And I think the more, I've said this a few times recently, the more we grow in emotional intelligence as a collective, the less this kind of stuff is going to work. Because no one, unless you're there to actually read something from a script, like, we want to feel the emotionality behind you and who you are and what you're about, and not the fact that you can write a perfect essay and memorize it and then recite it on stage in front of people. Like, we want to feel who you are when you're not being some idea of perfect. And for me, my edge or angle or approach in storytelling, it's like, let's unpack what's hidden behind the masks. Let's unpack the emotion that you haven't expressed. Let's unpack the parts of this story that impacted you so deeply and share that with the audience. And that isn't just like, yes, it comes through the way you express it, but even more deeply is about how deeply into you are you willing to let the audience come, which you can't script that.
Yeah, I mean, there's that saying where it's like, people don't remember what you said, they remember how you made them feel.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the sort of, like, that's how I see you working with people. You're interested in how can that person give their audience goosebumps. And that's not, the goosebump formula isn't formulated, you know, it has to be with what is alive right now.
Yeah, completely. It's just meeting life, really. It's like being live. I just did a little post on Facebook, which we had basically the last 4 years of doing mastery. We had people respond to why they chose to work with my institute and with me, and I think more than 90, maybe even 95% of their responses were like, I just felt it. And I'm like, this for me is the future, when we have that deep sense of resonance with each other.
Yeah, I do think that's also in the paradigm in the collective right now. Is like people are waking up to trusting their intuition and the felt sense in their body more than they're trusting, governments or corporations or bigger names. And more and more, what's happening is that we're wanting to work with people, and we prefer businesses that are humans versus being able to just interface with, I don't know, a logo or a name of a brand or something. So we want to know what is the ethos behind things. And that is something that I'm also tracking on this innovation lens, is like, if people want to buy from a human being, that human being needs to be ever evolving, really. Because it's like, and it's so fascinating. I've also started tracking, like, what does it look like in America versus what does it look like in Australia? And I feel like in America, there is this sort of like 2D version. It's like when a person continues to show up with the same like catchphrase over and over again, they're basically doing the same thing over and over again. They really like that there, because they're not really, it's like we like brands that we can understand really quickly. And then there's something in Australia that I see where the brands seem to be a little more like, they're not as strong, the brands, because they're ever evolving, they're ever changing. So there's something in that for me around like what the human psyche is seeking, is like they want to understand things really quickly, but they also need something that is alive.
Has depth, yeah. And
has depth. So there's not really an answer to that, but I also am curious of like what it is that we're seeking as human beings. So that's also a question.
Yeah, and I think that's probably changing with time, Like, one of the things, whenever I brought up this thing about emotional awareness or intelligence, I'm always asking audiences, how many of you have parents that did more work on themselves than you did? And I think I've had one hand up after, like, it's probably gone through 2,000 people's bodies have been asked this, and only one hand remained up. And I'm like, just consider the world that children are stepping into. And emotional intelligence they're going to be raised in, that's absolutely natural, let alone all the discoveries and forward thinking that's to come as a result of that. Yeah. It's like we're just going to be less willing to accept bullshit from each other. Hopefully. Yeah, hopefully. I mean, I don't know. People are into weird things.
Yeah. I mean, kind of where I want to end this on is like, what do you personally feel is like the future of this? And then I also want to ask you about yourself, like, the name that we've chosen for our surname is Bardovic. And like the breakdown of that name, like Ovic means like the sons of, the descendants of, and Bard is actually the word for storyteller. And so I feel like there is something in the magic of us even bringing this conversation into the world in this way, and what we want to be leaving behind, and for storytellers. So yeah, I guess I'll leave you with that question.
It gives me goosebumps. What's the question? Like, I feel the essence of it, but
the question is, how can you? What will have you sleep easy if you've passed this on? What is the message?
I don't know if that's an easy answer.
Reframe. What is the legacy of Bardovic?
What is the legacy of Bardovic? I don't know. It just sounds corny if I speak to that. It's like that you can trust the story that's emerging through you. And the more intimate you get with that story, the more power it's going to have in the world, as opposed to just being a branding or a marketing stunt that you're pushing through social media. It's like, for me, the best stories come from the people that have the deepest connection to themselves or to whatever the experience was. And it's like, if we're telling the story from here, it's very different than when it starts coming from our belly. And the more depth that story has inside of us, the more like force or penetration or connection it has when we allow it to move out into the world. So I think it's an equal journey of like coming inwards to find the deeper stories that really matter, and the act of being willing to share them and dispel them and have them affect people. And also, like, what comes to mind is a long time ago I watched this concert with it's probably Serbia's most famous flute player. I didn't know he was a big deal. I just went to his concert. This was in Australia. And at one point in the concert, and he is like an absolute maestro. It's like you effortlessly go into meditation when he's playing, because he's so present with the flute. And at one point he stops and he goes, it's not like a shame or a sin to learn the songs of other people and other cultures, but it is a shame, or I'm trying to translate from Serbian here, but it is a shame if we forget our own, and it is a shame if we don't learn and practice and recite our own songs. And for me, that message carries forth, like in a cultural context, like what it means to pass the songs of our ancestors through to our children, but also in a personal way. What are our stories outside of the collective, outside of what the media is pushing, outside of what the world wants us to live inside of? Like, what's the story from inside that we need to connect and recite and pass on to our children as well? Where I think it's what really matters.
Yeah, I love that. I feel like I really resonate with that. And even in our own journey, coming into being a couple and getting married, I feel that was the process for both of us. It was like the more we had to learn about each other's cultures to come into exploring what this wedding wanted to look like, what this relationship, what this family wanted to be, it had us deepen into our own culture even more, because it's like only by knowing where I came from so deeply, I was able to even learn or understand the depth of your culture.
Yeah, it's been funny. Like for me, even just the radical, the story like of Serbian people and the story of English people, it's just been this like, whoa, that's a completely different organism to be raised inside of, and the humility to come in to understand that.
Yeah.
And also like the possibility, and also like the spaghetti ball of that for our kids. I'm not sure what exactly that creates.
Yeah. What I do know though is that in that alchemy that is happening, I feel I'm expanding more as a human being, and the way that I'm letting these, like you sent me the little reel of Djokovic winning and the singing, people in Serbia singing, and I was just like crying. I was like, wow, like I'm letting this culture touch me and feeling the ripples of that now. And I would, you can't, that's not a mental thing, it's like something that has to happen through relationship and through the body. And yeah, I just imagine a world would happen if, people started sharing from that place inside of themselves and inviting people into their culture.
Yeah, I feel teary as you share about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel there's a whole podcast just in that.
Yeah, me too. Okay. Let's leave it. We're gonna go cry now. Love you guys. Bye.